I'm joined by Connor Morrissette of USCFootball.com. First season for the Trojans in the Big Ten. One of the many, many things that is new this year. I got to tell you, Connor, walking into Big Ten Media Days, seeing the Oregon and Washington and USC and UCLA logos just on the outside of the building was just kind of like, I have known this is coming for quite a while, and it was still like, oh boy, this is real different.
It's certainly jarring to see, but we're here, and I'm excited to see what USC can do in this new conference. I think they were picked to finish 6th in that Cleveland.com media poll, which I thought was interesting, and I'd have them around there as well, 5 or 6, I think.
What is the mood around the USC football program right now in terms of this move? I mean, this is probably has felt somewhat inevitable for a while because, you know, the Pac-12 was very obviously not going to stay together forever. Is it excitement? Is it nervousness? Is it, you know, oh boy, we're leveling up in terms of competition? What is the kind of mood around USC program and fan base right now?
It's definitely excitement because you're either in one of the two good leagues or you're not. And I know the Big 12 was really trying to get hold of that third spot, and they're battling with the ACC, but you really want to either be in the Big Ten or the SEC, as you know. So the fact that USC now makes that move, and even with Oregon and Washington trailing them, it's still significant, and people are really excited to be here because it seems like if you aren't in one of these two leagues, who knows what the future holds. Potentially we could see, you know, football go crazy with like a one mega conference and kind of do their own thing, and that would potentially include teams from the Big Ten and SEC and maybe some others as well. But if you're in this conference, you're in a good spot. So there's a lot of excitement.
It does feel like everyone's sort of gotten on the lifeboat now from some of the sinking ships that they have been on earlier. This is not just a new season for USC in terms of conference. This is a brave new world in the post-Caleb Williams era. And, you know, there were plenty of times last year that watching them, it felt like it was the run around and do something cool play got called, and he executed it very well, very consistently. Now he is gone. You saw Miller Moss in the Holiday Bowl, had a really impressive performance against Louisville in the Holiday Bowl. What's the level of confidence in terms of him just being able to sort of, he's a different kind of player than Caleb Williams, but being able to sort of take that baton and run with it?
I've been asked this a bunch, and I think I'm as confident as I can possibly be in a guy who's made one career college start, if that makes sense. He's done everything right. He had so many opportunities, to transfer, and he always chose to stay at USC, came there out of high school. When Lincoln Riley took over, Caleb Williams, who was in that same recruiting class as Miller Moss, came in, and it was clear that Miller wasn't going to start anytime soon. So he chooses to stick around. The team loves him. They all rallied around him in the Holiday Bowl. From an ability standpoint, is he as good as Caleb Williams? Let's be honest, no, because he's probably not going to be the number one draft pick. Not many quarterbacks are in that conversation, of course, so there will be a difference there. But off the field, people love him. On the field, he's really, really smart, really cerebral. He can make a lot of the good throws, and I wouldn't expect similar results to Caleb, of course, but I think it could be somewhat close, and people are excited about Miller. I'm excited about him, and like I said, to start this spiel, I'm as confident in him as I am a guy who's only made one career start.
And he's going to have some very different people around him as well. Lost a couple top rushers, lost a couple top receivers. I mean, kind of, again, starting from square one almost with the skill positions. USC obviously has for decades been known for bringing in plenty of very talented skill players. So who are the next guys up there?
At wide receiver, Lincoln Riley, in his first full class, he brought in 4 really, really talented guys. So Zachariah Branch, who was one of the best return men in the country last year. Lincoln Riley said yesterday he wants to challenge him to be more involved in the offense. He's a really, really talented slot receiver, 5-star guy, all the traits. He's someone to watch. And then Deuce Robinson, he was the number 1 tight end in that class. He's switched over to wide receiver, 6'6", a game breaker, a guy who can go really deep, and he's had a really good offseason by all accounts. So those are 2 names. Mekhi Lemon is another slot receiver, really tough kid, one of the best high school players who I've ever seen in Southern California. And then the name that I'm really fascinated by is Jacoby Lane. He's a 6'4" outside wide receiver. He had 2 touchdowns in the Holiday Bowl against Louisville. People on the team, they won't stop talking about how much potential he has and how they think he's going to have a breakout year. So those 4 groups, or those 4 super sophomores, are part of a really, I think, solid wide receiving core. And then in the transfer portal, USC's added a bunch of depth pieces, guys who will fit in here and there. But the plan is for those sophomores to take a big leap. And then at the running back spot, Marshawn Lloyd, the South Carolina transfer last year, he's in the NFL. He had an awesome season a year ago. He averaged like over 7 yards a carry. He's replaced by Woody Marks, who transferred in from Mississippi State. He's another NFL draft guy. People are really excited about him. So they have a solid group of skill position guys. I think it's a little bit of a you got to kind of project it out with the receivers, but I do think they can get there. The depth is a concern, especially at the running back spot, because behind Woody Marks, they really don't have any experience.
Last year, the offensive line was pretty solid in terms of getting push in the run game. The pass pro, it felt like there were some issues at times, and that issues with Caleb Williams back there is, again, the run around and do something cool play sometimes covers up for some of those issues. Where does the offensive line stand this year? Are they feeling like they're going to make some progress? Are they worried about maybe not being ready? What's the status of the line right now?
I think they feel very solid about their 1 through 5, even though their left tackle is going to be a redshirt freshman, Elijah Page, but people are confident in him. There's no depth, though. If one person gets hurt, Jonah Monheim is going to be the center. He was at left tackle last season. I imagine if one of the tackles goes down, you'd have to swing out Jonah because they have better depth at the center spot than they do anywhere else on the offensive line. So they have very limited tackle depth. Lincoln Riley said in the spring before the transfer window opened, that's going to be a position that we want to target, we want to go after, and they didn't get anyone. So that's a big concern. At guard, at the right guard spot, they're looking potentially at a redshirt freshman, or there's still a competition there. One of 3 guys will emerge, but again, there's really not as much competitive depth because there's so much inexperience. So I think the 1 through 5 is good, but if a guy goes down, that's certainly an area of concern. They just don't have a lot of guys who played a lot of snaps.
Not getting a lineman in the portal after the spring. I know there were not a ton of guys in there, but that sort of makes my mind go, okay, well, what is their NIL program like? How is the NIL program like? Some places, everyone immediately says Oregon when you say this, and Ohio State has plenty has had a successful NIL program recently as well. But how is the alignment there? How is the support there among the USC collectives to be able to find guys in the portal, find guys in recruiting?
The support is definitely there. The alignment is not really there. There's a lot of people, based on discussions I've had, where Lincoln Riley kind of wants to do one thing, and then people on the collective side, they're negotiating with some of these recruits, and they're trying to do something else. And I think it would be really helpful if Lincoln Riley, Jen Cohen, the AD, just got everyone in a room and said, let's figure this out, because I've heard from people across the recruiting processes, from kids to parents to high school coaches, there's just a lot of confusion going on. So that hasn't really been helpful. But the money's there. They're not in Oregon. They're not in Ohio State. But I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be number 3 or somewhere close to the number 3 team in the Big Ten in terms of budget for some of this. And USC, they've done a better job of recruiting out of the transfer portal because they're more willing to give money to transfer players who are more proven. Lincoln Riley's really been not as excited to give out some money to a high school kid who's unproven. And that makes sense, but you see the recruiting rankings. That first full cycle when NIL wasn't really a thing yet, USC gets the number 8 class. And then last year they get the number 17 class. Right now they have the number 24th ranked class in 2025. It's not all NIL related, of course, but we have to talk about that, and that's certainly a factor.
And before we move on to the defense, I do want to kind of touch on just the general alignment of the USC athletic department, because that has always felt like they've kind of cycled through athletic directors, and it has just always felt like it's not a huge school. It's not a massive athletic department, but it just has always felt like you can't quite get everyone, marching at the same time. What causes that? Is that there's just not that real strong figurehead at the top? I think of Nick Saban going to Alabama, and he gave the tip of the spear speech, where he basically said, "Yeah, everything runs through me." And when you're Nick Saban, you can do that. Have they just not had that guy? What's the cause of that lack of alignment?
Well, for a long time, they had athletic directors who were former football players who just weren't good athletic directors, so that was a big problem. Now, Jen Cohen's in. Mike Bone really orchestrated the move to the Big Ten for USC before he resigned. So he was a real athletic director, but he wasn't really up to speed with NIL stuff. So that was a problem. But now you have Jen Cohen, who, by all accounts, based on everyone I've talked to from Washington, people adore her. People really like her. She's competent. She's a good athletic director. But to your point about Nick Saban really being in charge, who's really in charge of the football program? It's not Jen Cohen. It's Lincoln Riley. So I don't want to say they're butting heads, but especially with NIL and recruiting, I think they have different strategies, and so that's kind of why they're pulling in a different direction. And I don't know what it will take to totally get that figured out, because I know they meet all the time. So those two getting on the same page and rowing in the right direction, I think, is important, because then that'll trickle down to the collectives and the support staff and the assistant coaches. Lincoln Riley runs the show, and I think if he can be a little hard-headed sometimes, and if he was more agreeable and was more willing to get help from some people who are there to help him and could do a solid job. I really think Jen Cohn could. That would help. But Lincoln Riley wants to do it his way, and I think right now that's kind of the stem of the problem.
Well, let's move on to the defense now. And last year there were plenty of problems on the defense, and this is an audience largely of Ohio State fans, so I will say the name Alex Grinch, and everyone will sort of cringe together. Everyone sort of had a similar experience there. I think it is, how much of last year's defense was personnel, how much of last year's defense was scheme, because it was kind of bad all around. But and Grinch is an easy punching bag, and if you go through my Twitter timeline, you will find that I have punched in that direction at times.
Yeah.
But but if you go back and is just pushing Alex Grinch to the side, is that ta-da, everything's fixed on the defense, or Danton Lynn, the new defensive coordinator from UCLA, or is he going to have some personnel stuff to work through too?
Pushing him to the side obviously helps. He orchestrated that speed defense where he wants smaller players to get into rush lanes and create turnovers, and it just wasn't sustainable. That first year with Lincoln Riley, they led the country, I think, in turnovers, which some of it was luck, some of it was Grinch, so I want to give him credit. Excuse me, but last year the turnovers just totally dried up and the whole scheme sort of fell apart, and it started with the defensive line. They just could not get the push that really was required, and then the linebackers weren't good, so pushing him out is certainly going to help. Danton Lynn, though, I don't think it's going to he's not going to be that piece of tape that stops the water coming out of the pipe completely. The defensive line is a big question mark because Isaiah Rakes, they brought him in from Texas A&M, and he was supposed to be this big nose tackle who was going to start alongside Bear Alexander and solve a lot of the problems for USC in the middle. And then after spring practice, he transfers to Auburn. And that was a massive loss for USC that they just recently addressed, adding a Wyoming transfer in the middle, but this player from Wyoming, Gavin Meyer, he wasn't a starter. He was a depth piece for Wyoming, so I don't really know how much a depth piece from Wyoming can come in and help USC, but we'll see. So they don't really have a classic nose tackle next to Bear Alexander. He might have to play the nose. The depth there is a big concern, and I don't know, even with Danton Lynn, what he did last year at UCLA, how much he can help with that. He had Liatu Latu last year. He had a much better defensive line. I think the secondary for USC can be good. I think the linebacking core can be good for USC, but I have real concerns about the defensive line, and I don't know what a coach can do to solve some of those problems. Eventually, you just need to have the guys, and I don't know if they do.
Well, and they've really loaded up through the transfer portal on defense because they had a lot of holes to fill. How many of the guys that they brought in through the portal are, this is definitely going to be a day one starter versus, well, we'll see.
So Easton Mascarenas-Arnold, the all Pac-12 first-team linebacker from Oregon State, he's going to be the Mike linebacker. He's going to wear the helmet, the green dot, the communication helmet this year. He's, I think, going to be a captain too, so pencil him in for starter. Kamari Ramsey was a representative for USC here yesterday. He's a safety. He followed Danton Lynn from UCLA. I think he's an NFL caliber player. He was really good at UCLA last year. He's another guy I'd pencil in as a sure thing. And then at the cornerback spots, there's going to be one transfer. There's three guys who I think are really good for two spots, and a few transfers have a shot to play there with one returner. So we could see some corners come in and who have transferred. And then in the defensive line, Nate Clifton was brought in to be like a hybrid edge, and maybe if you need him in the middle, you'll play him in the middle guy, and they've beefed him up because they don't have any other options, and he's playing in the middle alongside Bear Alexander right now. So he's a transfer from Vanderbilt. I look at him as a guy who will probably start, but that spot next to Alexander, I won't shut up about it because it's really, really a question mark, and it might be Clifton who's a transfer, but it could be someone else. Those are the guys who come to mind, but I do think the defensive depth is better than the offensive depth, at least in the linebacking core and in the secondary, and a lot of those have been supplemented by transfers.
Having concerns in the middle of your defensive line is not great when you have the following teams on your schedule.
Exactly.
At Michigan, Penn State, at Washington, Nebraska, Notre Dame. They're picked to finish sixth in the Big Ten. Those are five losable games. We'll see. We'll see what Washington is starting from square one even more than anyone in the league. What does success look like for year one in the Big Ten?
I think 9-3 would be huge. So that would be a successful season to me, and anything beyond that would be amazing. So I look at that. To me, I really think it's going to be a 7-5, 8-4 situation because last season, for as bad as it was, they had some easy games at the beginning of the schedule that really helped them. They played Stanford when Stanford was terrible. They played a bad Nevada team. They played San Jose State, who actually gave them kind of a game in the first half. This year, it's Utah State, who they'll beat. They just have to fire their coach or he resigned, whatever. Even if they had their coach, it wouldn't have mattered. And then every other game I look at, it's like, okay, should USC win a lot of these? Yeah, but there are no guarantees.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely going to be a challenging schedule in year one. I feel like I'm saying that about a lot of teams.
It is.
Turns out there's a lot of good teams in the Big Ten now all of a sudden. Last thing I wanted to ask you about, Lincoln Riley talked about this a little bit yesterday, the possibility of the Notre Dame rivalry going away. And, the way he was talking about it, it was like you kind of get the sense from him that it's like, well, we'll be very sad to see it go. I can't say this out loud, but we're going to be very sad to see when it leaves.
Yeah, I mean, he said what he means. He brought up Nick Saban, who at Alabama would never schedule a game like that. The tradition is totally different with Alabama. They don't have that classic Notre Dame rivalry. It's different, but I think that's in an ideal world. He would come to USC, he'd get rid of that game, and he would try to have the easiest path possible to get to the playoff. Fans don't want to hear that, and you should see my Twitter. It's blowing up. People are so annoyed at that and upset, and I get it. I don't really know what the right move for him is. I mean, in my opinion, just keep the game, because if you're not good enough to beat Notre Dame in a given season, you're probably not good enough to make the college football playoff. That's the college football fan in me talking. I get what he's saying, but I mean, that's a quick way to piss a lot of people off. And I think deep down he does want to get rid of the game. That's why he is bringing it up. And we've heard some chatter even before that about the game potentially going away at some point. So I don't think he did himself any favors yesterday. I do think deep down he wouldn't hate if it went away. So we'll see what happens in the future. But I know I'd be disappointed.
Yeah, it feels like we've lost a lot of those rivalries over the years, just for, the backyard brawl or the border war or Texas A&M, which now we have back. But I mean, a lot of those have kind of come and gone over the years, which is the price of progress, I guess. If this is progress, it is the price of progress. We'll see.
Ratings are high, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. The TV folks are happy. What else? What else really matters? Connor, let folks know where they can find you, where they can follow you this season to keep up to speed on the Trojans.
Yeah, I'm at uscfootball.com, and you can follow me on X, C_Morrissette. My last name is double everything, MORRISSETTE.
All right. Well, looking forward to following you and seeing what year one in the Big Ten brings for the Trojans.
Appreciate it.